Just want to say a few words. I'm Lois from the Live Art Development Agency, and we're delighted to be partners on Awkward Bastards, working with Mike and Mac. The first panel this morning was on framing diversity, and it was looking at the sort of different curatorial programming institutional contexts that diverse practices and politics are being represented. And this second panel is pasts and futures. And we're going to be sort of really talking about a panel saying here, considering our responsibilities to our past and our futures. How do we ensure that underrepresented artists and practices are represented in cultural histories? What kinds of archival and legacy projects and approaches address issues of exclusion and invisibility? How do we rewrite and reclaim histories? How do we equally invest in the future, supporting future generations of makers and cultural leaders in meaningful and instrumental ways? And we might talk about some of those. I'm really delighted to be chairing this panel with some of my favourite artists and thinkers and makers. I'll introduce everybody as we go along, but the first keynote presentation is by David A. Bailey, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a very long time. And David is an independent curator and also one of the co-founders of the International Curators Forum, who have just announced the amazing Diaspora Pavilion that's taking place in this year's Venice Biennale. So David, are you good to go?
Hey, hi everybody. So what I want to try to do in my brief presentation is to give some examples, well, one particular example of a movement which I think works well in terms of preserving its legacy, and then talk about some initiatives that I've been involved in, and hopefully if I have enough time, to talk about the latest thing that I'm doing, which is helping me to think about the past, but also about the future as well. So the first thing I want to start with is that if people didn't know, in the 50s and 60s, there was lots of people from the Caribbean coming to this country, but in particular in London, there was a group that was formed around the kind of Caribbeanness, which is called the Caribbean Artist Movement, which was formed by these three characters in this photograph, which was taken by Horace Ove, which was John LaRose, Andrew Salkey, and Camille Braithwaite. And really, it was as much as a meeting ground, but also for them to share experiences, talk about being displaced in a different country, but also, you know, I like the idea of kicking down the effing doors, as we said before, but the idea of actually opening up the doors and kicking them down in terms of Britain in relationship to diversity, and also thinking about the notion of the Caribbean within that. So in some ways, it was much more of a cross-art form group, but they published, and in the corner you could see Saviku, which is one of their publications, in my left, which is your left, which was a mythical bird. And they also produced exhibitions. This is a place that no longer, this is the Commonwealth Institute, which I don't think is, no, it no longer exists. Commonwealth Institute used to be quite a vibrant exhibition space up until, I think, the 90s, and it closed down. But again, this is actually a exhibition that they did in the 70s, and it kind of reminds me that, you know, I never actually thought about the idea of actually photographing your openings, but I mean, it's really important, isn't it, in terms of archival, because this is like the 1970s, this is like 71. You can't really see this, but in the middle of this photograph, which is absolutely amazing, is the artist Ronald Moody, and these are his two massive sculptures, and he's talking to Guy Brett, you know, the art critic. So it's like, this photograph in itself is just so archival. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, I can spend the whole 10 minutes just talking about this photograph. But I mean, if you go to the Tate and you go to the Ronald Moody archives, you'll see all this material, which is where I got this from. Not only did they, you know, they came together, they met, they produced exhibitions together, but they also documented their own history. And so Anne Walmsley pretty much went to all of the meetings and documented all of the minutes from those meetings, and then produced the book, The Caribbean Artist Movement, which I would highly recommend you get to get a good understanding of how a group came together and how they kind of somehow documented, gave themselves a presence, but also archived themselves at the same time. So obviously they were very, very aware that, you know, they needed to do this, and they were absolutely aware that they were part of a movement. You know, like most movements, like the Harlem Renaissance movement, the artists of the Harlem Renaissance movement were not much aware that they were part of a Renaissance movement. They knew that they were part of a movement which was about the rebirth of the Negro, but they didn't actually know they were part of a kind of Renaissance movement. Whereas actually the Caribbean Artist Movement actually understood the idea that they were part of a movement. So it didn't even stop there. So they then thought, well, actually, there's going to be at some point a place for all this stuff to be stored. So then a few of them created the George Padmore Institute, which is based in London, and I would highly recommend that you go there and visit and see that archive. So one of the kind of sons of that movement is Stuart Hall, and weirdly enough, I didn't do this on purpose, but now that I see it, I think subconsciously maybe I did. But anyway, this is Stuart in his office in Birmingham in the Culture Studies unit, and taken by the famous godfather of photography, Vanley Burke, who is, I suppose I don't need to introduction to Vanley Burke, who is, I would say, this country's, you know, premier photographer. And really what I wanted to show there was, since Stuart's passing in, God, is it 2014? We decided how do you keep somebody's legacy, their ideas live and vibrant? And we felt that through the work of Stuart that we produced, set up a foundation, which was about the legacy of his ideas. And one of the things that Stuart liked to do was to collaborate and also work with a variety of diverse people, but also a variety of young people. So the foundation has fellowships in the name of Stuart Hall, but also what's quite interesting about the work we do at the foundation is how we are trying to somehow reach to a wider and younger audience who are coming across Stuart's ideas for the first time. And we feel that's important work for us because in that sense, we not only keep Stuart's ideas and legacies alive, but also at the same time have that kind of vantage point of that kind of younger audience having a different critical van point around Stuart's work. Now, I have to say that 4 minutes ago, wow. So I have to say, carrying on from that legacy, that one of the things that Stuart was interested in was in the archive, and he wrote a lot about the question of the archive and the legacy of the archive, particularly around photography and particularly with his work in relation to 10/8, the magazine and the institution. Now, I don't know if it's been said, but I think it really needs to be said that for all intents and purposes, London is not the matrix and where everything happens in the world. For me, I have a very strong interest in black contemporary art, particularly contemporary photography, and I have to say the most important areas of where this work has come from, and I have to say the most important areas of how a second generation of black art practice emerged in the 70s and 80s. This region, particularly Birmingham, has to be the most important place for that. And it's not because I'm here in Birmingham, but it is the place. And in terms of photography, and in terms of what people would call as black photography, 10/8 was the magazine and the institution which rode that. So, I mean, just be proud of that heritage, and how 10/8 somehow, through its work, not only wanted to produce kind of contemporary photography, but always looked towards questioning the archival through its publication. And I only mention that because I work with 10/8 and particularly on several issues with Stuart Hall. One was Black Experiences, and the last issue, which was Critical Decade. I'm going to shoot very quickly and talk about two other things, one of which Lois will kind of recognize. One of the things working with Lois and Live Art Development Agency was the question of how do you document live performance and how do you then document a kind of critical voice or critical framework within live art performance. And we always thought about the problematics around, particularly the work of people like Susan Lewis, who phenomenal a live art performer, and her piece Ladies Falling is an incredible piece. And I think it's through, Lois, our discussions around thinking about that, where, Lois, you proposed the idea that we do documenting live, and the idea that somehow, you know, even though it's difficult to recreate those kind of historical moments, what we can do is, with the participants who lived through those historical moments, create a dialogue and a series of roundtables, which we did with this project, which was then filmed, where people were talking about their practices in the past and also talking about their practices in the future. And we made that a publication, and I kind of framed it with kind of a historical essay. Very quickly, in terms of the work that I'm doing at the moment with the International Curators Forum, we're embarking on, well, just let me say very quickly what the forum's about. Earlier on, people talked about the idea of traveling to Glasgow and how being outside your comfort zone. Our organisation is really about bringing people to different events for different parts of the world, but also getting them to have some kind of collegiate mentality where they can have a place where they can think, develop ideas without it being in kind of a competitive environment. And we kind of usually do these things around biennales. And what we're going to try and do over the next year and a half is that we've invested in a group of young and emerging curators and artists, and with the artists and curators, look at how they will develop professionally, how they will produce their work, what kind of archival things that are necessary for that, and see where that would take them in the first 10 years and hopefully begin to support them over a 10-year period. The thing about that is, the idea is that we're interested primarily around the area of the diaspora, the question of what it means to have the diaspora in terms of the 21st century. We're interested in the idea of what it means to have a legacy of artists from the diaspora, but also for us, the way future is to invest in young and emerging talents, give them the mentorship and professional development that they need, give them the support and all the kind of archival frameworks they need to kind of critically frame their practice and make that practice happen to the future, and also give them the longevity and also the hope for continuity in the future. Thanks.